This session is going to cover the branch logic tools and LegalServer. For reference, displaying on the screen right now the branch logic tools help topic. I'm showing the version from the community site, which everyone has access to. This same topic is also available on your site on the top-level help page. If you click on the help tab on your site, it is in the administration tools section of the help page, and also on the front page of the community site is where you can find that link. So this is here for reference. You're working with branch logic tools later, and we'll also come back and look at a couple of things on this page as we go through the session. As the help page explains the branch logic tools, the purpose of them is to allow you to display additional forms or subforms, or what we call branch logic forms, on a form based on either information existing on a record or based on a user's choice in response to a field, answering yes or no to a field or making a selection from a drop-down and so forth. The branch logic tools are available in different modules, but we'll be focusing today on the case matter module, since that is the most common use for it. Let's first take a look at the front end of branch logic, what end users see when they are working with the form that you as an administrator have set up with branch logic on it. We're going to use an auxiliary form on a case. As you can see, we're looking at an open case. This will work. Branch logic works the same way on intake forms as it does on auxiliary forms. Intake forms are a common place to use branch logic as well. For sites using the classic interface, you can see we are using the new interface here. None of the things that we'll cover in this session will be any different in terms of the branch logic tools. So on this open case on our demo site, I'm going to go into the Actions menu, and we have a branch logic example auxiliary process. This is going to bring up a very simple form that just has a couple of examples of branch logic on it. On this form, you can see the first section of this form is branch logic based on funding code. And there's an instruction box that says select 01 HUD Fair Housing to see an example branch logic form. So as you can see, this case is currently assigned to the funding code 4234 sample grant source, and nothing is being displayed below it. If I drop down the funding code list, you can see on our demo site we only have 4 funding codes. But if I select 03 another test grant, again, nothing happens. If I select 50 test code, nothing happens. If I select HUD Fair Housing, then you can see that an instruction box pops up as well as another drop-down field for HUD 9902 ethnicity. So the instruction box that popped up along with this field, this is the branch logic form, the subform. As you can see, it's a very simple form, but that's what we're talking about is based on the selection, you'll see another form will pop up with additional questions, instructions, any other form elements that you can put on a primary form. You can also put on a branch logic form. As far as the toggle field, which is the field that you're making that decision based on. You're deciding which forms to display or not display. That's called the toggle field. That can be Boolean fields, yes/no fields. That can also be a lookup field. It can be a field like funding code, which acts like a lookup field. It's not technically a lookup field. You cannot, however, toggle on like a numeric field like age at intake. You also can't toggle on date fields like date opened or date closed or something like that. So that's what the front end of some very basic branch logic looks like. So let's go into the back end of this form so you can see how this is set up. So I'm going to go to the admin menu on this form and edit form. If you're not familiar with the edit form link, your role needs the permission to show that edit form link. Hopefully your role has that. If not, you can go into admin, user rules and permissions, and give your role that permission. In the new interface, you would see it as I just showed it with the admin menu, which is close to the actions menu on a case, and it would be called edit form. Using the classic interface, the edit form link would appear at the very bottom right of the right side taskbar. So here we are on the back end of this form, and if I scroll down into the form element section, we can see the header element that is just displaying that header shows up, branch logic based on funding code. Then there's the instruction element that is just explaining, to pick 01 HUD fair housing to see the branch logic form. And then the next element down is the branch logic block, actually the first branch logic block on this form. We'll talk about the one below it in a few minutes. And if I expand that branch logic block, you can see the various options that it has in it. The first is the funding code, the toggle field. And if you drop down the toggle field, you'll get a searchable list. And if you've added other just bare field elements to a form, this search option and the list will look very familiar. So you can type in things in here. So if you wanted your toggle field to be language, then start typing in LAN. You can see you can toggle, at least on our demo site here, on language or second language. If I wanted to toggle on a field like county of residence, I could start typing and search that. You can see I can toggle on county dispute or county of residence. Again, any of your Boolean fields or your lookup fields or some of the special fields like funding codes that act like lookup fields. The next option in the branch logic block is the read-only subforms checkbox. So if you're just wanting to display information on the branch logic forms, the subforms, then you can check that option. And so if you have 5 fields on a subform that normally would be editable, then if you check this box, it's only going to display them in a read-only non-editable form. The required option is here. So the required option in this example is probably hard to see, but it's a checked, but it's grayed out. That's just indicating that funding code is a required field at the database level. But if I had picked language or any of the other fields that were not required at the database level, then I would have the option to make that toggle field required or not required. The next option is hidden. Hidden can be useful if you don't want people to be able to change the toggle field, but you want them to see forms based on the value that's already set. And so, for example, funding code is a good example of that, is you may not want people on this form to be changing the funding code. You may have a process that they need to go through, or maybe they're never supposed to change funding code on a case. On an open case like this, typically a funding code has already been picked for the case. But what you could do is check that hidden option, and then someone would hit this form. They click on the link to the form. The form would display, and then the branch logic would do whatever you've told it to do based on the existing already selected funding code. So in the example here, with a case that was assigned to that 4324 funding code, nothing would happen, so the form would not display anything unless it had other elements on it. But if the case had already been selected as funding code for HUD, it would just immediately display that HUD funding code there. So again, that can be useful if you don't want people changing the toggle field, at least not on this form, but you want to display information based on a selection they've already made. Default value acts just like it does if you were putting this field, the toggle field, on a form. So you could, if it's a yes/no field, you could default it to yes or no. You could also pick a funding code to default. Custom label will just let you label the toggle field. So if you did not want it in this example to say funding codes, you could put a different label on there. And again, that not necessarily assumes that you don't have the toggle field hidden, but typically you would only use a custom label if you were also displaying the toggle field. And then finally, you get into the meat of the branch logic form itself, and this is where you are selecting whether or not you want to display a branch logic form for each one of the values. In this case, funding code, which is a lookup type of field, what you will see is all the funding codes that are active on your site. On this demo site, we have 6 different funding codes that are active. You can see that only something is going to happen if the 01 HUD fair housing option is already assigned to the case, or if the person picks that, if the toggle field is displayed. For all of the other funding codes, nothing is going to happen because please select is not in there. Now, the list of fields that you get, or the list of forms, I should say, the branch logic forms, is we'll go into the admin section and we'll show you where you can see branch logic forms and where you can create those. But what you're going to see when you drop down the option for each value, each lookup value, in this case each funding code, is a list of actually case-specific forms and also branch logic forms. Now, in this demo site, we have a lot of case-specific forms examples. There's, I think, one for each legal problem code, so you can see there's quite a few. And then we get down into quite a few other branch logic forms down here. You may notice that some of the branch logic forms in this demo site are designated BL space hyphen space. There's no requirement for that. That's just a naming convention that some people like to follow. So I could select for each funding code a branch logic form or not, depending on if I want something to happen. Now I'll come back up and to the toggle field, and let me find a Boolean field. And so I'll just pick domestic violence present, show you what that looks like. But since I changed the toggle field, the form is refreshed. And it needed to do that because it's going to give me different options here within the block. So now you can see domestic violence present, it's a Boolean field. I still have the same read-only subforms. You may notice now, since domestic violence present is not required at the database level, I have the option to make it required or not required. And my default value, you see, instead of a list of funding codes or a list of languages, genders, whatever your toggle field is, I get yes or no. The toggler style, with the Boolean field, I get options for either a drop-down menu or radio buttons. And then instead of being able to pick a branch logic form for each one of the lookup values, I can pick a branch logic form for yes or no, or both of those. So I'll pick for yes the same branch logic form that we saw before. The funding code is HUD. Then click Continue to save the form. Now back at the front end of the form, you can see that the header is still the same. I didn't bother changing that. Same with the instruction box, but you can see how domestic violence present is there as the toggle field instead of funding code. And it's defaulted to no, or maybe it's already been set to no on this case. More likely it was probably set during the intake on this case to no. And so nothing is displaying. If I change it to yes at this point, then I'll see that same branch logic form because I just used the same test branch logic form as we were using before with funding code. So let me do one more variation on this. I'll just show you how the form will behave when there's already a value saved with the form. So we'll go back into the back end of the form, and we'll leave it at domestic violence present. But we'll change the options here so that if domestic violence has already been set to yes, nothing is going to happen. But if domestic violence has already been set to no for the case, then we're going to see that same branch logic form that we saw before. And now I'm going to also hide the domestic violence present field. So I won't be able to select that on the form. I'm just going to see branch logic forms based on what the existing value already is. All right, so I click Continue. That saves that change, brings me back to the front end of the form. And you can see as soon as I hit the form, then I'm automatically seeing the branch logic form here. And you notice the domestic violence present field is not showing up because I've hidden the toggle field. So that's how that works. The other example of branch logic that we've got on this form is here with this second heading, the branch logic toggle button example. What this branch logic block does is it displays a show hide button. There's actually a couple of options that we'll see here in a second about this. By default, it displays a show button. And then if you click the show button, it displays a branch logic form. So if I click the show button, you can see again we have an instruction element, and then we have a disability notes element here. So the purpose of this version of the branch logic is to avoid having to create like a simple yes-no field to do something. So here, instead of having to create a field that says, you know, show disability information yes-no as my toggle field, then I can just say, you know, I don't need to want to bother with a toggle field. I just want to, it's kind of an on-off thing. So that can save you from creating a lot of site-specific fields if you don't already have, you know, a Boolean yes-no field to toggle on, or if you don't really need a toggle field at that point, you just want to do this as an on-off. So let me edit this form. We'll look at what this block looks like in the background. So if we come to the back end of our form, again, we have the header element, the second from the bottom in the enabled elements, and it's just displaying that header information there. And then we have the branch logic form toggle button. So this is a distinct different block from just the branch logic block. If I open up the options for the branch logic form toggle button block, you can see that it has a subform option that is a required selection on the block. So you just can't just have this block on a form empty or blank. And this is the same list of, you know, this is a list of all of the case-specific forms and branch logic forms on the site. Instead of just a straight drop-down list like we saw for the the options in the branch logic block, this one also has the the search. So I can search, use the little search box there. Then I have an option for button shown text. So this is what do you want the button label to be after somebody's clicked it to clicked it when it says show. And in this case, the default is hide. So if somebody clicks the show button, it turns into, the label turns into a hide button. Below that is the button hidden text. So when the form is hidden, what do you want it to say? By default, it's show. But you could change this to whatever's going to make sense. So for example, instead of having the button say show, you could have the button itself say enter disability information. Somebody clicks it, and then instead of the button saying hide in the displayed state, you could have the button say hide disability information or something like that. You also have the ability to display a button label, which is not on the button itself, but what's going to appear out to the left of the button. So you have two different options there that you can use. The next option, default to showing subform. is just like what it says. So do you want the button to be, in the shown or displayed form by default, or do you want it to be hidden by default? Save subform data even when hidden. This again goes back to the button. You can have, you can say show, and it'll display your branch logic form with, one or more fields and other elements on it. And what do you want to happen if somebody displays that form and maybe even they start typing or filling out some fields, typing in the notes, element, whatever happens to be on your branch logic form? What do you want to happen if they click hide? So should clicking hide mean that I want to hide that because I changed my mind, I don't want to enter any of that data, which is the default, which is, nothing will be saved if it's not displayed? Or is the person going to be expecting to be able to show the fields, show your branch logic form, fill out information, and then hide it to get it out of the way, and continue on with their form, and then have that data saved? So that's what this save subform data even when hidden is about. So if you want the data to be saved, if somebody shows your branch logic form, makes any selections, and then hides it, if you want that data to be saved, check that option there. All right, so that is the back end of putting the branch logic forms or blocks on a form, whether it's an intake form, whether it's an auxiliary form. If you have dynamic timekeeping, you can do branch logic on timekeeping forms. Say branch logic is available in other modules as well. The one thing that I did forget to say or show when we were in edit mode is that I mentioned that both of these are block elements. And so to add a branch logic block to one of your forms, as you would normally do for any block, you would select block, and then you would get the search list. And I just want to show, if you start typing BRAN, then you'll get, you see the branch logic block, the branch logic form toggle button block. There's also another block down there called conditional branch logic form include. It's also within the same family of doing branch logic. I'll show you a little more about the conditional branch logic form here in just a second. Now, in terms of creating your branch logic forms, which is obviously a significant part of this, you do this like you would create and edit any other forms. You go into the admin section of LegalServer. Then in the Processes, Forms, and Profiles page, then on that page, of course, you would, as you would do anytime you're working with Processes, Forms, and Profiles, you would first, if you're not working in the Case Matter module, make sure that you pick the appropriate module. Obviously, if you were working on a timekeeping form, you would select timekeeping first and let the list refresh. And so you have branch logic, a branch logic forms tab. And then, as I mentioned, you can also see case-specific forms and the drop-down list of forms that you can display. Your subforms, so they can be either branch logic forms or case-specific forms. Typically, they're going to be branch logic forms unless you have an older site where, or your site that already uses case-specific forms. If you don't already have a case-specific form that you need, if you're developing a subform from scratch, I would just recommend going ahead and using branch logic forms. If you have existing forms, just like any other form, this is where you would come in and edit those. If you are creating a new form, in the classic interface, or the new interface, I should say, you go to your Actions menu, and you're going to have a link called New Branch Logic. In the classic interface, you would see this like your other action links will be over on the right-hand side, and you'll have a link called New Branch Logic. This, we won't go into a lot of detail about this. It's like building any other form or editing any other form. So you need to give the form a name is required, description is optional, continue button text is optional. Typically, your branch logic forms do not have a continue button on them. There could be instances where that might be appropriate. You will want to mark it active. So you're only going to see active branch logic forms when you're on your primary form configuring your branch logic block, whichever one you're using. Then you're only going to see active forms there. So mark it active if you're ready to use it. And again, the continue button, typically you do not want a continue button on branch logic forms. And then in the form elements, you will just add your form elements again like you would any other form. So typically you might add some header elements, instruction elements, fields and notes and so forth, as we did on a couple of the different examples that we saw. I'm going to flip back over to the help page on the branch logic tools. And I just wanted to show you the conditional branch logic form include, which is in the alternate versions of branch logic that we've talked about. We just call them alternate because the original branch logic block, or branch logic was the original block, and then later the form toggle button block was added. So coming down to the alternate version section, again, the branch logic form toggle button, we added that because people were finding themselves having to create a lot of simple yes-no fields just to show, not show their branch logic forms in a certain situation. And this just avoids the need to do that because you have the button there. And then the final relevant block is the conditional branch logic form include. As the help page explains, it allows you to do branch logic based on one or more conditions. So you can display a branch logic form based on percentage of poverty, legal problem code, county of residence. The other two branch logic blocks only operate, well, the branch logic block only operates on the toggle field, the single toggle field. The branch logic toggle button, there's no, technically no branch logic there. It's just the on-off switch. For the conditional branch logic, on the help page, there's a link to the block help page for this particular block. And if we come over here, there is a screenshot of what the configuration looks like for the branch logic form include block. You can see in the screenshot, you select a subform, your branch logic or case-specific form. You also have the read-only subform option that we saw in the toggle block. You also have the ability to say these various tests, things that you're going to test for as to whether or not to show your form. You can AND those together, or you can have those be ORs. Now, under the display conditions, we can see that we can test on number of people 18 and over, number of people under 18, total household size, percentage of poverty, adjusted percentage of poverty, age at intake, legal problem code, special legal problem code, county of residence, county dispute, language, race, and citizenship status. Those are the only possible fields that you can test on with this block. So those are hard-coded into the block itself. But again, you have the option to do those as AND or OR. So you could say, for example, that if the households the case's percentage of poverty is from 0 to 125%, and the legal problem code is 37 domestic abuse, display the branch logic form that you picked at the top here in that block. Or you can say, do the same, use the same conditions, but just do those as an OR. So if the percentage of poverty is from 0 to 125%, or the legal problem code is 37 domestic abuse, display the branch logic form. Probably a little more possibly applicable to some organizations might be citizenship status and legal problem code. So if citizenship status is citizen or legal problem code is 37 domestic abuse, display this particular branch logic form. Those are all the pieces that you need to use branch logic on your site. Again, you can use these on your intakes. You can also use them on your auxiliary forms, on your cases, and in other modules as well. So it's a fairly powerful tool. It's very widely used by a lot of people. So I think it's probably typically helped you with your working with your forms, whether it's intake, your auxiliary forms, or over in your other modules. So I don't see that we have any questions posted. So I think we will go ahead and wrap up this session. Hope people found it helpful. Again, refer to your help page or go to the same help page on the community site if you need some reference when building your branch logic. And of course, as always,